And welcome to today's webinar. Apologies for my lack of understanding of PowerPoint. I'm Sean Bradley, and I'm the People Director here at Perkbox. And we're delighted to be hosting our expert webinar speaker for today, who is Lucy Adams, former HR Director at the BBC, and the creator of Disruptive HR. In case anyone's not familiar with Perkbox, we're the UK's fastest growing employee engagement platform. We believe that happy employees perform better and stick around for longer. We've invited Lucy here today to address how HR can stop stressing and start innovating. And Lucy brings a fresh perspective to business-minded audiences. Sailing the BBC through a turbulent period as its HR director, Lucy knows what it takes to lead change in a high-profile environment. Frustrated by the lack of innovation in the profession, Lucy created Disruptive HR to help HR directors and business leaders to do things a little bit differently. So just to recap, this webinar will cover three things: the conditions we need to create for innovation to thrive, how to refocus our employee experience to create innovation, and some practical changes HR can make to help drive a culture of innovation. Before we begin, just a bit of housekeeping from my side. Lucy's webinar will last around about 25 minutes, and then we'll have some time set aside for any questions at the end of the session. You should be able to see that there's a chat function, so if you've got any questions, please submit as we go along, and we'll answer them at the end of Lucy's presentation. And lastly, this webinar, we're going to record it, and it will be available on demand. We'll be sending the webinar recording to all those who registered over the next few days. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lucy Adams. Lucy, over to you.
Thanks, Sean, and it's really lovely to be here. I haven't been to Perkbox offices for a while, so it's really nice to be back. And I was saying earlier, where I was being asked whether I do many webinars, and I said I do some. I do a lot of face-to-face stuff, but I do some. And one of the things I always find with webinars is that because I can't see you, I've no idea whether you're laughing, interested, bored out of your mind. Because what we want is obviously a conversation, you know, and everything we're trying to do with Disruptive HR is to start a new conversation. So clearly it's very difficult to have a conversation when I'm just speaking into the ether. But if you want to carry on the conversation, you've got my Twitter there, you've got our website address there. So, you know, please do drop me a line if you've got any questions that occur to you after what you hear today, and after, you know, if you didn't want to write any questions on the webinar panel. As Sean said, I'm a recovering, well, Sean didn't say this, but I'm a recovering HR director. So I've been in some fairly big roles over a number of years, and I got just really frustrated with my own profession. I got really tired with what I saw as us peddling processes that really came about in the kind of 1980s. And the fact that we was continuing to kind of, you know, this was all we had to offer. This was our toolbox. Performance management, talent reviews, engagement surveys, and we'll talk a little bit about those later on. But I just got increasingly frustrated with what I saw as being a lack of innovation in our own profession. Where I was at the BBC for 5 years, where I headed up HR and internal comms, there was just so much going on. There was so much change. Just to kind of give you a feel for some of the changes that we were wrestling with, and the changes that we were wrestling with are not unique to the BBC. Every organisation has got some of these changes going on, if not all of them. And what I realise now from working with clients in every sector, doesn't matter whether you're in the public sector or private, whether you're in retail, financial services, media, whichever sector you're in, every company, every organisation is after the same big four. They're after more agility to help their people cope with change. They're after more collaboration, because clients, customers are increasingly wanting a much more seamless experience, and clearly digital plays a role in that. They're after more productivity, more for less, and they're after more innovation. And what we're going to be talking about today is how organizations and how HR in particular can create and help build that innovation. I like to think that HR is in its kind of third stage, its sort of third evolution, if you like. You know, when the days when we were all personnel and our job was to kind of provide a service to employees. Then we had our second evolution. We were all told, no, now you're strategic business partners. And what you've got to do is to do the kind of, serve the needs of leaders and fulfill the strategy. Well, I think we're in our third phase. And that means that we are responsible for creating the conditions where innovation, collaboration, agility, and productivity can thrive. And creating those conditions is something that perhaps we haven't really been used to doing. We've been about operational efficiency, we've been about cost savings, we've been about streamlining, we've been about compliance. And that's really led us down a particular path. So moving to an innovation focus is not going to necessarily be easy for us. But if we look at the conditions that underpin innovation, they are the ability to work autonomously, so not always being subject to lots of close supervision. This is the way that you do it, conform with the way that we want it. So allowing people much more freedom. The next condition for innovation is a kind of roundabout feeling. They call it psychological safety. The jargon is psychological safety, but basically what that means is that we've got to feel safe to make mistakes. If you don't feel like you can experiment and make mistakes, then you're not going to innovate, because all innovation comes usually from lots and lots of little failures. And finally, innovation comes from having a mix of individuals. I don't mean the kind of typical diversity and inclusion sort of protected groups piece. I mean different experiences, different voices, and mixing those people up together. So if those are the conditions, what does that mean for HR? Well, unfortunately, I think that what we've been doing is actually really crushing innovation. A lot of what we've been about is actually about driving compliance, conformity, and not increasing and providing the conditions for innovation. So what I want to do over the course of the next 20 minutes is just give you, first of all, some real big trends that we're seeing that are shaping HR more broadly. And I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on that because we don't have time. And then I want to go into 4 specific areas where HR can really help build their approach to innovation and create greater innovation within their teams. So I'm going to start with the bigger trends. And the thing that we talk about in disruptive HR and the kind of the framework that we've built is the EACH model. And the EACH model stands for employees as adults, consumers, and human beings. Again, I'm not going to go into this in any great detail, but the EACH model is around thinking differently, is about creating new relationships between organizations and their people, HR rethinking its role, and moving away from a very parental relationship that we've traditionally had, where we've seen our employees almost like children, where we need to look after them and we also need to discipline them. So we've created very compliant and passive organizations. It's about moving away from one-size-fits-all processes. So this is our approach to performance, this is our approach to reward, this is our approach to talent, and really thinking about customizing, personalizing, and segmenting to make sure that we get greater impact in what we do. And finally, it's about taking a human-centered approach. A lot of what we do in HR are design processes designed around poor managers. You know, we don't trust them to do it, so let's make sure they do it by putting in place a big bulky process and making sure that they comply with that process. What we're seeing in terms of the trends in HR is moving away from these bulky, cumbersome processes to really understand how human beings think, feel, behave, are intrinsically motivated, want to communicate, and building this into our approaches. Now, if you're interested in the EACH model in any detail, you can go onto our website, and there's more information there in the blogs, but there's also a diagnostic. And if you want to see how adult, consumer-focused and human you are, there's a free diagnostic that you can take, and you'll get a personalized report for your organization. That's on our website, disruptivehr.com. And the joy of this is that the EACH model can be applied to the whole of the employee life cycle. So whether you're looking at induction or resourcing or reward or performance management, you can apply this approach, and the diagnostic will give you some practical things that you can do in each of those areas. Let's get on then to the kind of the meat of this session, which is about how HR can build innovation. And this slide is going to be up for the remainder pretty much of the session, because what I want to do is to focus on these 4 areas. Getting rid of the annual cycle, moving beyond the org chart, redesigning your employee experience, and looking at HR as innovation role models. Just bear with me while I take a quick slurp of water. So let's have a look at the annual cycle. Almost everything we do has an annual cycle. Now, we know that businesses very often have an annual cycle because they need to report annually on the financials. But what we've done is to take that annual cycle and apply it to human beings, to the employees that work for us. So if you think about our annual schedule for our key processes, the annual performance review. We set objectives at the start of the year and we review them at the end of the year, occasionally with a mid-year review. We do an annual engagement survey. We ask all of our employees just once a year how they feel about a number of things. Our annual talent review takes a huge amount of effort. If you're responsible for doing this, you will know about getting line managers to fill in 9-box grids and allocating people into different quadrants. And then we get a result at the end of the year. Our annual bonus scheme, still many of us operate with an annual bonus scheme where rewards are paid out sort of 3 months after year end net of tax. What this does is it slows everything down. And if we're saying innovation is about speed, is about agility, these annual processes do not make sense for a fast-moving world. The idea that we would set an objective for someone's performance in April and it still be relevant the following March, given the pace of change, is just crazy. What we're seeing is that companies with a strong innovative culture, they don't wait to give feedback till the end of the year. They don't wait to show recognition to the end of the year. They don't wait to move their talent till the end of the year, and they certainly don't wait to find out how their people feel about certain things and the things that they want till the end of the year. We're looking at processes that are much more agile, much more frequent. So we're seeing frequent check-ins rather than the annual performance review. Career conversations happening on a quarterly basis. Lots of examples of companies who are doing that. We're seeing a move away from the annual bonus scheme to giving spot rewards in a much more timely way. And Perkbox, you obviously know all about that. Instead of talent reviews, the annual talent review, we're seeing talent discussions happening at the board level or at senior team meetings on a even monthly basis. Not for very long, but just making sure it's a focus on a very, very regular rhythm. And of course, we're seeing a move away from annual engagement surveys to kind of monthly or quarterly pulse surveys. One of my favorites is a company, big company, they do car windscreen replacements. It's not a kind of sexy brand, but hugely successful global organization. And what they do, instead of an annual engagement survey, their CEO sends a text message to a sample of their employees every week. One question: how is work for you this week? It's human, it's agile, it's frequent. So I think just because businesses have an annual financial cycle doesn't mean to say HR needs to. And I think we need to challenge that and just get out of this idea that things happen on an annual basis. So let's have a look at the org chart. We've traditionally focused and supported team structures based on that rigid hierarchy. So again, we cascade our objectives from the very senior teams right the way through the divisions and the departmental, and then down to team, and then down to individuals. We report our annual engagement surveys on these rigid teams and these departments. We calibrate talent and reward within team boundaries, and we obviously, in terms of traditional HR structures, we assign a business partner who's responsible for that team. But if we think back to what I said earlier, that innovation, one of the key conditions is a mix of teams. And if you're a mix of individuals across different teams, different functions, and if you're familiar with the work of Marcus Buckingham, he has got a great line where he talks about, where the work gets done. Now, unfortunately, if we're continuing to focus our processes around these rigid hierarchical team structures, we're not promoting an agility, we're not recognizing it, and we're not making sure that our processes that adapt. So let me just give you some examples of organizations who've kind of moved beyond this org chart. One of my favorites is Western Union. And what they did was to look at talent reviews. And instead of looking at talent reviews happening within departments, they brought together clusters of managers. They said, we want you for an hour a month. So back to getting rid of this idea of an annual approach. Just 1 hour a month, we'll provide a sandwich. But what we want you to do over that lunch is we're going to talk talent. We're going to talk about the issues you have. We're going to talk about the opportunities that you have, either vacancies or project opportunities. And what was fascinating was that they began to see more movement. They began to see people thinking much more cross-boundary when it came to that opportunity that they had, because they were looking at bringing the talent discussion out of those individual departmental and team boundaries. Shop Direct, they do, as those of you, I think you're all in the UK, very.co.uk, the online retailer. Really interesting, dynamic HR structure that they've got. And what they wanted to do was to look at how can we support a number of experiences rather than having teams assigned to individual processes. So instead of having a team that only looks at reward, or having a team that only looks at performance, or a team that looks at employment policy, what they did was to get multifunctional teams that work on 4 key experiences. I think one of them is, how do we create energy within this organization? Now, of course, that's going to bring in all of those people that I just mentioned, plus it's going to bring in people from facilities, it's going to bring in people from IT. So it's really about thinking a way out of these kind of traditional silos that we've operated within. We also see organizations moving away from the traditional objectives cascade and performance cascade, and looking at setting objectives within teams and even agile project teams, and then the team review replacing the individual end of year performance review where they get a grade or a rating like a child in their end of term report. What they do then is that the team leader acts much more as facilitator of that team review. Cross-functional teams who have worked together, and they're reviewing their performance as a cross-functional team. Again, moving away from the traditional siloed approach that we've taken to performance management. So third on the list then is about redesigning the employee experience. And, we see organizations that they put, innovation on their value statement. And then you look at them as an organization from an every moment of truth for the employee. So from the way they're recruited, to the contract that they get given, to the way in which they're inducted into their team, to the way in which their performance is reviewed, to the way that they're rewarded. Nothing about it shouts innovation. Back to what I said at the start, a lot of what it shouts is about compliance, being passive, waiting to do as you're told, waiting to ask for permission, rather than actually creating a culture of innovation. So we should really have innovation running through our processes like a stick of rock. And I'm just going to share some examples of what we see some organizations doing that are really much more innovative and progressive than the norm. Now, Netflix is the classic one that everybody knows about, where they moved away from a rigid employment policy manual and they moved to this freedom within a framework. One of the key conditions for innovation is autonomy and freedom to make your own choices and use your own judgment. Things like expenses policy, one line, do the right thing by Netflix. So instead of this heavily bureaucratic, loads of policies that are based around the lowest common denominator in our organization, the 2 or 3% of people that might behave badly, instead of penalizing everybody, it's about moving to a broader framework where you're allowing people to use their judgment and you're allowing people, you're trusting people to do the right thing. And I know that can be tough, and maybe there'll be some questions about that. More than happy to answer that. Instead of our processes focusing on retention and keeping people within our teams, innovative companies focus on movement around the organization. I mentioned Western Union. There's also Nielsen, big consulting firm. They have an approach where you're encouraged to say, I'm ready to rotate. And you just flag that on their intranet. I don't know if they have an app now, but they flag it on their intranet. So as an employee, you're saying, I'm ready to do something different. Again, encouraging, stimulating movement. LinkedIn, though, also take an approach where they're not just encouraging movement within the organization, but also to go out of the organization. So they, if you've read the book that was written by the founder of LinkedIn, a guy called Reid Hoffman, called The Alliance. There's a great SlideShare presentation. If you can't be bothered to read it or don't want to buy it, you can get it all on the SlideShare presentation. And what he talked about was that they adopted tours of duty, so quite a military expression. But this idea that we don't want you to come and work for us forever. We know you're not going to anyway, particularly with the increasing frequency of career moves. But what we do want is for you to come, and the time that you're here, for you to have an amazing career experience. We'll then actively help you go and find somewhere else to work if that's what's right for you and for us. But we'll stay in touch with you because we'd like you to come back. So they're much better than many organizations at ensuring that they stay in touch with their alumni and that they bring them back in. So they're creating movement, not just in the organization, but outside, and not being afraid of that, seeing that this is a good thing because people go and get new experiences. When you've been doing the same job in the same organization for a long time, it is blooming hard to be innovative and think creatively. Even in the 5 years, when I first got to the BBC, when I first got there, I would be saying, why do we do it like this? And challenging. And after 5 years, I accepted this was the way we did things because I was used to the norm. So it's really important that we're encouraging people to move, not just around, but outside. I really like some of the approaches that organizations are taking to induction. Instead of seeing induction as being a moment where we encourage conformity, we broadcast to people through our one-day workshops or whatever it might be, our induction program online, where we tell them this is what's expected of you, this is how you need to behave, these are our policies. What Wipro did was to say, how could we turn this on its head? So Wipro are a big business process outsourcing organization in India. And what they said was, how can we use induction to really find out what is special and different about each individual that's joining us? Therefore, how we can play to their strengths. They did a problem-solving exercise with them during their induction period, and they shared the information with their line manager. Now, the rubbish line managers are not going to do anything with that information, but the ones who are perhaps a bit more curious, who are perhaps a bit more interested, they were able to adapt their style, and particularly where somebody was very creative, to give them a bit more space to challenge the way that things were done. We need to look at our leadership competency frameworks. We know that these don't work, they are archaic, they are about everybody being perfect and trying to get the full gamut of skills and competencies. But I do think there is room for a couple of things. There is real room for really understanding how we focus on people's strengths. And if you've got somebody that's particularly creative, giving them space, but also looking at what are the kind of 4 broad criteria that really drive businesses that can cope and thrive in a disrupted world. Red Bull's done something very interesting where they look at some of the criteria 4 criteria that they insist everybody necessarily excels in, but are pretty good in. Analytical capability, because innovation is not just about having the light bulb moment, but really understanding how to problem solve and drive. They look at connectivity, because having a range of connections of different insights is likely to mean that you've got a greater range of stimulus and therefore be more innovative. They look at, what's the third one? Tenacity, resilience, because again, if you want to drive innovation, doesn't usually happen on the first attempt. They want people who are going to stick with it. And the 4th one is about curiosity and creativity. So they've said that these are the 4 things that are important to us as an organisation, and they've got an amazing array of tools to support them to make sure that they recruit these people. If you're interested, have a look on their website, wingfinder.com. Really worth a look. And finally, on the employee experience is around reward practices. We're seeing, instead of rewarding hitting operational targets, we're seeing organizations beginning to encourage experimentation and almost rewarding potential failure. So making it psychologically safe for people to do it. Procter & Gamble and Tata are beginning to experiment with this. But my favorite one is Intuit, a technology company, and they actually have failure parties. So whenever they get a failure, they actually celebrate it, and the chief exec buys drinks, and because the whole point is that if you're not failing, you're not innovating, and you'll die. So that's my particular favourite. Now I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to speed up and just do this last point about innovation role models and HR. We're not always associated with being the innovators in the organisation. Some of that's not our fault. It's the things that we have been asked and driven to do. But I do think we can make a step change in the way that we operate. First of all, if you haven't got partnerships with your marketing teams and your digital teams, you need to make sure that you're getting close to them, because they will approach things in ways you haven't thought about and will bring a real level of different insight into the way that you do it. In terms of the way that we think about ourselves, instead of thinking about HR services, let's think about HR products. There's a reason we're doing this, not just to change the name for kind of branding purposes, but to actually develop a product, you need to be much more user-centered. So instead of a service which needs to be streamlined, cost-effective, easily monitored, scalable, products are much more about the end user. How will they be used? Are they fit for purpose by the people who will use them, our customers, our internal clients? If we think about products, we start to think about agile product design. What's the minimum viable product that we can go with? In HR, I used to make everything so perfect. You know, we would disappear for months at a time, trying to get it absolutely spot on, absolutely accurate. But actually, let's just go with something that may not be quite ready and see how it works. Let's get some feedback. So using that kind of minimum viable product approach. You don't have to roll it out for the whole organization every time. Let's experiment and pilot with one part of the organization. We're seeing organizations do this more and more, and it's a really effective way of making sure that you've got it right, but that you can move more quickly without everybody having to change. Let's customize for our different clients. One size doesn't fit all. It really doesn't matter if we're providing different solutions. It shows that we are more innovative, more creative, because that's what consumer organizations do. They don't just provide one product or one service, they customize and they segment what they do. And finally, progress is better than perfection. Just go with it, just show some pace, do these sprints. Again, back to Shop Direct, what they do is that the senior HR team only plans 3 months ahead. They don't have this big, cumbersome HR strategy for the next 5 years. It's just, what do we need to do on the next 3 months? And everybody focuses on that. they move quicker, they get better feedback from their clients than many HR teams that I know. So I suppose the key point here is we've got to understand the conditions that drive innovation, psychological safety, the ability to work autonomously, playing to our strengths. We've got to make sure that all of the moments of truth that we create in our organisation are aligned around creating and building innovation. We've got to think holistically. I think that's probably enough from me. I think I've probably done more than I was expected to in terms of the time, so apologies if I've eaten into question times. As I mentioned, if you've got any questions that you don't get answered today and you want to contact us, or if you want to sign up for our free blogs, or you just want to drop us a line, there's our email there.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Amazing amount of information. It's made me think about our own HR practices here at PertBox. But before Lucy goes, there are a couple of questions that have come up from the audience. So I'm going to ask Lucy, and without any preparation, just going to attempt to answer these questions. So the first question is, do we think that the CIPD will change their learning style to support change in HR behaviour and approach?
Oh, it's a bit difficult for me to say what CIPD will do. It would be good to know what the specific issue is that CIPD. I mean, obviously CIPD are trying to cover a whole range of things, aren't they? They're trying to drive innovation and create change in the profession. And I think Peter Cheese, the chief exec, is doing some really interesting work there. They're also trying to provide standards and accreditation, and so I think they've got a very difficult job on their hands. But it's very difficult for me to comment on whether CIPD are going to change their strategy. I'm afraid you're going to have to ask them.
Great answer. I would have said the same. And the second question is, how would you advise how to secure buy-in for senior managers to get widespread adoption of innovation in the organisation, and any strategies for actually getting them on board? Because they have maybe a mindset around HR that we've talked about, which is you're there to scalable processes that last a year, and it's all calendarized. It's like if you hear about the performance management calendar, then it's quite easy for managers to follow that process because they don't necessarily have to think for themselves.
Absolutely.
So how would you get managers, senior managers, to go, actually, I would really like to embrace this new approach?
So I think first of all, and I'll try and make this a short answer because it's a really challenging question, because obviously this is what we face as HR professionals. This is the big challenge we face, is trying to get buy-in from leaders. Let's take the performance management and move into a different approach as an example. First of all, I think you've got to really think about who are you trying to convince and what will work for them. Sometimes what we do, and I've done it, is we produce a paper, one business case. But actually there will be a whole raft of reasons why senior managers are perhaps not interested or haven't been buying into different solutions in the past. And we have to really get under the skin of who they are, what their objections are, what matters to them, what are the things that would work in their area. And I think we need to be much more tailored and customized in the way that we try and overcome objections. The second thing is, what is kind of going to work for them? And sometimes it's about just looking at what are we spending and the time and effort that goes into performance management. So Deloitte famously got a lot of traction by just saying, we're spending 2 million hours on performance management. Super smart. In a business that sells their time, that's going to get people listening. Another organization I know did a small bit of research and came back with some data which said, you know what, over 75% of our people have had the same rating for the last 5 years or more. Now, this company prided itself on being very progressive, very kind of really robust around performance. That was a real shock. So sometimes we need a bit of shock and awe data to really kind of be the thing that hits them. Sometimes that it can be that just letting them know what their competitors are doing. It's very sad, but sometimes I would use that shamelessly with organisations and just say, by the way, did you know that our competitors are doing this, this and this? And sometimes that's enough to get them to change. Sometimes it's just about appealing to them on a human level, because I've never come across a manager yet who likes doing performance reviews.
No.
8% of companies say they're worth the time and effort. So actually just getting them to think about, how does this help you, our current system, how does it help you increase your performance in your team? Very rarely will they be able to give you a concrete answer. And let's not forget that at this stage, all you're asking for is permission to go and explore, to do something new. Quite often what we'll do is put a business case in, which is trying to make the case why it needs to change, and put in place the new system all in one go. I would split that into two. Just go for permission to explore something different. Very rarely will people say that that's not going to happen. Very rarely will senior leaders resist that. So I think there are a whole raft of ways that we can then make it easier for people to adopt these new techniques. But I'm conscious, again, of time, so happy to share that with people via email afterwards if that's what they want.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question that says that moving from like a parental type of organization or an HR function to a more autonomous type culture is a huge step.
Yeah.
Are there any key milestones that we could go, we're on the journey, we're making progress?
Yeah, so first of all, check out your default position. And what I mean by that is spend some time with your managers and leaders, just checking in with them. What are the underpinning beliefs that they have? Do they believe that actually the vast majority of people that work for them come to work to try and get away with stuff, to try and rip the organisation off? Or do they actually believe it's a small minority? Most organisations, I can think of one exception of a chief exec who said to me that actually all my employees just come to work to see what they can get away with. I'm not working with them. But most organisations will recognise that what they've done is to try and protect the organisation from a small minority. So it's helpful just to kind of get that starting point. Do they believe also that most adults that work for them are capable of using judgment, of using adult judgment? And a sound judgment. Again, if you ask that question, most people do say yes. So check your default position, because that is useful to keep coming back to when you start to try and do things that are a bit scary. Secondly, go small scale and something that isn't going to destroy the organisation financially or reputationally if it goes awry. So you don't go for stuff like health and safety, you go for something small. You ask your people, and this is a key point for me, you ask your people which are the rules and processes that get in their way, that prevent them from doing the best service to their customers and prevent them from doing their best work. Ask them. It's not about ripping up the rule book for the sake of it. It's about freeing people up to do their best work and serve customers. So TD Bank in the States did something called Kill a Stupid Bank Rule. We're seeing organizations doing employee hackathons more and more where they're saying, Ford did this, what are the things that get in the way of you doing your best work? And I think it's quite surprising that, again, what they come back with is actually relatively small scale things that you can affect change. Finally is, a couple of things. Pilot, experiment, don't go wholesale, just so you can understand what the consequences are. And finally, it doesn't have to be big policy changes. It can be as small as line managers, when they're asked for permission or they're asked for their approval, is just for the line manager, instead of giving an answer, saying, I don't know, what do you think? Just trying to get some line managers just to practice that. Or, I trust you, use your judgment. Even just those small behavioural changes can have a massive impact. I don't know about you, Sean, have you ever worked with somebody that had all the answers? You stop thinking for yourself.
Yeah.
You just think, well, they're going to have a view, they're going to tell me their opinion, and that's what I'll have to do, so I'll just go and ask them. I think back to one guy that I worked for in Serco. I would have loved it if he just once said, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah.
It might, because I got lazy with him.
Yeah.
And stop, because I just thought, well, I'll just wait and see what he says. But actually, that I don't know, what do you think, or I trust you, use your judgment.
Thank you very much, Lucy. We've got time for one more question. Okay, one more question. So I'm going to pick my favourite question, and I'm going to pick this one, which is you've gone through a lot of processing in terms of the information that you've given us. The important thing, I think, and the most important question is, what can we do next to find out more about what you've spoken about today?
Great. So
what recommendations do you say, this is our first step?
So I think it would be really good to get your team together, and if innovation is really important to you, and my God, why wouldn't it be? But if innovation is something that, you know, is a key kind of priority for your organisation, get your team together and to look at, I call them moments of truth, which is a very much consumer term, but the moments of truth that are created for your employees, and to break them down and look at them. So that would be the way you recruit, the way you induct, the way that you manage teams, the way that you reward people, the way that you performance management, the way that you do talent management. Look at all of these and say which of these are driving innovation, which are neutral, and which are actively working against people being innovative. And things that would be actively working against them would be, again, annual cycle, would be big, heavy bureaucratic processes. This is the way you have to do it. Things that are very much parent-child, which are done to the employee, and are driving non-collaborative behaviour that are driving people focusing in and down in their own team. Summary, what I would suggest is get your teams together and look at those. Look at the moments of truth you're creating for your employees. Which are those that are promoting innovation? So just to recap, autonomy, are promoting diversity of perspectives and views and mixed teams, and are also creating a climate of psychological safety where people feel safe to experiment. Which of your processes, from recruitment, induction, performance, and so on, which of those are driving those conditions, and which of them are actively working against them? And then I would just choose one of those areas and say, how could we do this in a very different way, and get some permission from your senior team just to explore it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Lucy, and a fantastic session. And apologies to everybody if there are a couple of dropouts within that. But if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about what PerkBox attracting and retain your staff, then you're very welcome to go to our website or request a brochure, book in a chat with an agent. And our next webinar is on the 9th of May, and this one is specifically about seeing the PerkBox platform in action. So you can sign up to our next PerkBox Unboxed event on the 9th of May, searching for perks.so/unbox. You can see that on the slide. And one of our PerkBox engagement experts will give us a 20-minute guided tour and answer any of your questions. So it just leaves with me to say thank you everybody for attending. There will be a recording of this to all the people that registered, but the biggest thank you goes to Lucy Adams of Disruptive HR for giving us a fantastic webinar. So thank you everybody, and have a great afternoon.